Life expectancy in the Middle Ages was dramatically shorter than today, often estimated between 30 and 40 years on average, though this figure can be misleading. It does not mean most people died in their 30s. Instead, extremely high infant and child mortality dragged the average down. Many who survived childhood could live into their 50s or 60s. Still, life in the medieval world, roughly from the 5th to the late 15th century, was harsh, uncertain, and shaped by constant exposure to disease, malnutrition, war, and environmental hardship. Understanding why life was so short requires looking at the interconnected realities of medieval existence. One of the most powerful factors affecting life expectancy was disease. Medieval Europe had no understanding of germs, bacteria, or viruses. Illness was often explained through religion or superstition, such as divine punishment or imbalance in bodily humours. This lack of scientific understanding meant that prevention and effective treatment were nearly impossible. Epidemics spread rapidly through towns and villages, especially because sanitation was poor and people lived in close quarters with animals. Diseases like dysentery, tuberculosis, influenza, and smallpox were common killers. Even minor infections could become fatal because antibiotics did not exist, and medical practices often made conditions worse. The most devastating example of disease was the Black Death in the 14th century, which killed an estimated 1/3 to half of Europe's population. However, even outside major pandemics, everyday infections were dangerous. A simple cut could lead to sepsis. Dental infections often became life-threatening. Childbirth was especially perilous for women due to infection, bleeding, and lack of sterile practices. Medical practitioners, often barber surgeons or herbal healers, had limited tools: bleeding, herbal remedies, and prayer, none of which addressed the root causes of disease. Another major reason for short life expectancy was poor nutrition. The medieval diet was heavily dependent on agriculture, which was vulnerable to weather, soil conditions, and political instability. Most peasants lived on bread, porridge, vegetables, and occasionally dairy or meat if available. Protein and vitamin deficiencies were common. In years of poor harvests, famine could spread across entire regions. Malnutrition weakened immune systems, making people more susceptible to disease. Even in better years, the lack of dietary variety meant chronic health issues such as stunted growth and weakened bones. Climate also played a significant role. The Middle Ages experienced periods like the Little Ice Age, which brought colder temperatures and shorter growing seasons. Crop failures became more frequent, and food shortages more severe. Livestock often died in harsh winters, further reducing access to meat and dairy. In rural areas, survival depended entirely on successful harvests. A single failed season could lead to widespread starvation. Famine weakened entire populations and left survivors physically debilitated for life. Living conditions further contributed to early death. Most medieval people lived in small, overcrowded homes made of wood, mud, or stone, often sharing space with animals such as chickens, pigs, or goats. These conditions allowed diseases to spread easily. Houses lacked proper ventilation, lighting, and waste disposal systems. Human and animal waste often contaminated water sources, leading to outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Clean drinking water was not guaranteed, and boiling water was not always practical due to limited fuel availability. Sanitation in medieval towns and cities was especially poor. Waste was often thrown into streets or rivers. Rivers served multiple purposes: drinking water, washing, and waste disposal, creating a dangerous cycle of contamination. Fleas, lice, and rats thrived in these environments, spreading diseases like plague and typhus. Even noble households, though cleaner and more spacious, were not immune to these problems. Another major factor was the lack of effective medical knowledge and hygiene practices. Physicians were rare and expensive, usually available only to the wealthy. Even then, their understanding of the human body was limited. Treatments often relied on the theory of humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which led to practices such as bloodletting. Unfortunately, these treatments often weakened patients further instead of helping them recover. Surgery was extremely risky, performed without anesthesia or antiseptics, making even small operations dangerous. Childbirth was one of the leading causes of death among women. Midwives assisted most births, but complications such as obstructed labour, infection, and hemorrhage could not be treated effectively. Infant mortality was also extremely high. Many children died before reaching the age of 5 due to disease, malnutrition, or poor hygiene. This is one of the main reasons average life expectancy statistics appear so low in medieval records. Violence and warfare also shortened lives. The Middle Ages were marked by frequent conflicts, including feudal wars, invasions, and local disputes. Soldiers faced brutal battlefield conditions with limited armour and primitive weapons. Injuries that are easily treated today were often fatal. Even outside of formal warfare, banditry and raids posed risks to rural populations. In unstable regions, survival often depended on physical strength and luck. Feudal society itself contributed indirectly to poor health. Most peasants worked long hours in physically demanding agricultural labour. They were exposed to harsh weather conditions, repetitive strain, and injuries without medical care. Life was defined by survival and productivity rather than comfort. Rest was limited, especially during planting and harvest seasons. Over time, this constant physical stress weakened the body and reduced lifespan. Education and knowledge limitations also played a role. Without widespread literacy or scientific understanding, harmful practices persisted for centuries. People relied on tradition, superstition, and religious interpretation to explain illness and misfortune. While spiritual care provided emotional support, it did not address biological causes of disease or environmental health risks. Despite these hardships, it is important to understand that medieval life was not uniformly miserable. Many communities developed strong social bonds, religious support systems, and cultural traditions that helped people cope with hardship. Monasteries, for example, often provided care for the sick and preserved medical texts. Some herbal remedies had real medicinal effects, even if they were not scientifically understood at the time. People adapted to their environment in ways that allowed survival, even if life remained uncertain. In conclusion, the short life expectancy of the Middle Ages was not caused by a single factor, but by a combination of interconnected challenges: disease, poor sanitation, malnutrition, lack of medical knowledge, warfare, and harsh living conditions all contributed to high mortality rates. Childhood was particularly dangerous, and survival into adulthood was never guaranteed. Yet those who did survive often developed resilience and lived meaningful lives within the constraints of their world. The medieval period stands as a reminder of how far human society has progressed in medicine, hygiene, and quality of life.